morning. So, last time we left off talking about dealing with stress, so I hope I didn't stress you out way more than what you already are. My goal is to help you think about ways to not be stressed. So, I have this picture up. This is me in college. I know I look a little different now, but I put this picture up because this, to me, stands out as the point in college when I experienced the most margin and the least amount of stress. And what this was, Dr. Brodigan, and I have so much to thank him for, led a trip to England every few years. And it was a May term trip. And so it was housed right after graduation for 2.5 weeks. And one of my life goals had always been to go to England. Always on my bucket list, and I knew when that trip came up, I had to take advantage of that. I had to find a way to make that happen. And at the time, I didn't have enough money, but I was able to I found out I was able to use student loans for trips, which was pretty awesome. And so I took out a little loan knowing I'm probably not going to have this opportunity in life again in the same way. And what I experienced was probably the most stress-free 2.5 weeks of my life up to that point. Because I wasn't working, and I had always worked. I had a paper out from 6 years old up through high school. So I always had a job. So this is the first time I actually hadn't worked some form of job. I didn't have school to worry about because this wasn't a mission trip. It wasn't a high intensity, we're getting tested. It was, hey, we're learning about history. We're experiencing a different culture, a different country. And it was amazing because it was the first time where I could really immerse myself in what I was experiencing and really be grounded in what was going on. And it wasn't that I didn't have some stress-inducing experiences there. I remember walking down a road and I was just exploring England one day in London, and all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of people coming with signs saying "Death to Americans." And I'm pretty sure I was the only American on the road that day, so it was a little fear-inducing. And I got lost quite a few times in different cities. I spent 3 days in Oxford by myself, which was pretty cool. I got to watch the England-Argentina World Cup game in a pub in Oxford, which was an amazing experience. But it was one of those times where it was a perfect recipe for I get to experience something in life and know what it's like to not have stress. And I know for a lot of you, this is what vacations are, trips are, and the last 1.5 years have been pretty rough in being able to have those times. But part of what I'm going to talk to you about today is why those times are so important, why it's important when you have those breaks, or how to kind of create those breaks and reduce your stress. So I talked about margin a little bit. Margin is the space between our load and our limits. And let me explain each of those things. So the formula for this is power minus load equals margin. Your power is made up of factors such as your energy, your skills, your time, your training, emotional and physical strength, faith, finances, and social supports. Your load is made up of such factors as work problems, obligations, commitments, expectations, both your own and other people's, debt, deadlines, and interpersonal conflicts. And so this is part of what I talked to you about, where creating margin in your life simply isn't just creating more time. Because many of you have time at different places in life. Maybe it's somewhere where you have lots of time, but you don't feel any more restored than what you do at any other point in the year. You don't feel like you move forward, you don't feel any better. Or maybe it's Christmas break where you simply crash for a while. And you leave Christmas break and you don't feel like you're any better off. You feel like you jump right back into that stress. And so when you look at this, part of what I want to encourage you in, because again, it's not just time, there's other ways to create margin in your life. Sometimes it's taking care of yourself better. It's practicing better self-care. It's sleeping better. Which if I could give you one piece of advice about sleep that's going to change your life, go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. If you could simply do that, your life would change dramatically. I think the single biggest problem college students have with sleep is you have erratic sleep patterns. Some nights you stay up to this time, other nights you stay up till this time, some days you sleep till chapel, other days you wake up early for a class, and that just wreaks havoc on your body. You can get used to sleeping on a regular schedule. You'll be amazed at how much more energy you have. Exercising, eating well, drinking water. It's amazing how few students drink water on a regular basis. Those simple things can give you an amazing amount of energy to where dealing with the same amount of stress or the same amount of things you have, you're able to do it better. Skills, training. This is part of why you're in college right now. You know that getting an education gives you some sort of advantage. And I would say it helps you deal with life better. When you're a good critical thinker, one, you're not going to be taken advantage of as much, and you're going to make decisions that create opportunities for you. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was here, I lived in Miller Meadows 2 of my years, what we referred to lovingly as the retirement homes. And it was nice. It was quiet. It was calm. And we had a Miller Meadows retreat every year. And one year we had Professor Jim O'Donnell come in, who was at the time a professor in the business department. And he had a conversation with us about investing. Which as college students, we weren't doing investing, but he said, in a few short years, you're going to have the opportunity to invest your money in a 401k, a 403b, a Roth IRA, and he said, you need to take advantage of that opportunity. He said, you are young, and he said, you may not feel like you have a lot of money, but you have time, and that is worth far more than money. And my wife and I both happened to be there for that conversation, and we both took advantage of that. And as soon as we had the opportunity to invest in our work retirements when we started working, we poured as much money as we could into those retirements. And the market was good for us. Like, it was just a good time to do that. And, when I talk with students about investing, one of the things I say is my wife worked for 13 and a half years. And she took advantage of her 403b at the time. I've now worked for 10, 12 years where I've had different retirements and I've been pouring money into it. But because she was working first and she had invested money, she will probably always have more money than I will, even though I will continually put money in. But that decision has created some financial margin for us. We know that when we retire, we're going to have options about vacations, about being able to do the things we want to do. And that was skills. Somebody taught us information that we utilized. And college is doing that for you all the time. And other skills you learn. Some of you have skills where maybe you have musical ability. Maybe you have coaching ability. And you'll take those abilities, and in some ways, they'll help you with providing more financial stuff for yourself. So also emotional and physical strength. I talk in my class, Psychology of Health and Wellness, about psychological acceptance and developing your emotional vocabulary and your emotional intelligence. And part of dealing with stress in life is not being knocked off your feet every time you get stressed. Every time you have a crisis, every time something's going on, you want to be functional. And you want to be more than functional. You want to be able to get through it well. And part of how you do that is you learn to become comfortable with things like sadness and loneliness and frustration and anger. We pour a lot of energy into avoiding those things. We desperately try to distract ourselves from loneliness, from anger, from any amount of stress. And what tends to happen is the more you try to not think about something, typically the more you think about it. If you think about somebody where there's a little bit of drama and you're trying to avoid them, it takes a lot of energy to avoid someone. It's the same thing with our emotions. And so learning how to develop the capacity to handle your emotional experiences better, where, it's a Friday night, I don't have anything to do, I'm kind of feeling lonely, and rather than, okay, I'm just going to watch Netflix and not think about it, maybe try to explore the reasons why you're lonely. Like, why is this bothering me so much to be with myself? What is so hard about this experience for me right now? And maybe you'll learn something from that. Maybe you'll figure out, what do I need this to be? I challenge my students in class to have a good experience, to plan a good experience. And I think a lot of times what you learn from loneliness is, I don't plan very well. That was me in college. I had a lot of weekends where I ended up with nothing to do and nobody to hang out with, which for an extrovert is torture. And what I learned is not that people didn't like me, because usually I'd ask people like, well, I've already got plans or I've already got something going on. What I learned is I was really bad at planning ahead. When I started talking to people like a week ahead and saying, hey, do you guys want to get together for some, chai and games or something on Friday or watch a movie? Sure. Other people liked having plans too, but I had to plan ahead for it. So when you look at power, there's lots of ways to build up your power. And when you build up your power in one of those different ways, and it doesn't matter which way it is, you're going to find that it gives you a little bit more margin. When you look at load, these are things like your work life. And what I want to tell you with this, because I could go through each of these areas, but I got a lot I want to cover in the next 10 minutes here. Not all work is equal. You could work 20 hours at a job and 20 hours at a different job, and one of them could be way more stressful than the other job for you and take a lot more out of you. I worked as a shift assistant at Babb, and I wouldn't say it was super stressful, but I dealt with a lot of stuff. I dealt with people being obnoxious, where, well, this is too hot, this is too cold, I don't like the just people where they were very, very picky customers. When you work in food service, by the way, you feel very differently about how you treat servers and other people. But I moved from that, and actually after that I went to door-to-door sales, which is like a horrible experience. You get rejection all day long, to working as a lifeguard, a CMC, and maintenance for the university. And those jobs were heavenly because the stress was down here. Probably because I never had to save anybody as a lifeguard, but I was probably working about the same amount of hours, but it was in a role where I was surrounded by good mentors, good supervisors. I got to work with fun people. The stress was completely different, and that changed the load for me significantly. For some people, it's things like debt or dealing with deadlines or interpersonal conflicts. Drama, get rid of the drama in your life. Get rid of the toxic relationships. If there's one thing that will fill up that load, that will take away your margin, it's toxic people or toxic relationships or toxic situations. Sometimes you find yourself in a place where you walk into drama all the time. And it's exhausting. So here's some areas of margin if you're looking at trying to create this for yourself. Emotional energy, physical energy, time, finances. And you may feel like, well, how do I do that? How do I create time? If you're not sure, talk to somebody, find somebody in your life who looks like what you want your life to look like and talk to them. And my guess is if it's not one of your peers, there's a supervisor, a professor, a staff member, somebody where they've got some sage pieces of advice for you. All right, I said I was going to talk about balance a little bit too. We have a culture that encourages an abundance of more through 5 main methods: differentiation, proliferation, combination, invention, and discovery. And a great example of this is when you go to the grocery store and you try to buy something. I'm pretty sure it's a game for my wife to send me with a list to the grocery store that's very ambiguous. It'll say things like spaghetti sauce. And in my mind, I can visualize her at home saying, I wonder how long it's going to take him. Because I get there, there's 40 kinds of spaghetti sauce. 6 different kinds of cheese sauce. And of course, it's the one time where I can't reach her by phone or by text. And the really funny thing is when I'm standing there, one time she sent me for oil. I kid you not, oil. And I know sometimes she makes out these lists for herself, so she knows exactly what kind of oil. And so I get to Kroger, I'm standing there, I look over, there's 2 other guys standing there too. We're all looking like, she sent you for oil, huh? Yeah. Is it olive oil? Is it canola oil? Is it light? We don't know. So, and again, if you want to have fun with your husband someday, just send him with a really ambiguous list. But part of what you see is, even when you go for things like milk, there's so many choices. And that's just one area of life. If you start looking at a lot of other areas of life, it's just overwhelming sometimes. Romans 12:2, and I love that, use this verse. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. When we talk about balance in our life, it's a stable, reliable orbit around our core priorities. This means a life will have steadiness, constancy, imperturbability, which is basically being unable to upset, and purpose. Galatians 5:22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there's no law. Part of balance and how this ties into margin is setting your priorities. What is a priority to you? For me, these are my priorities. It's my wife, Julie. It's my boys, Toby and Asa. And I've got, we built a train there. So if you're trying to figure out what's going on there. By the way, I love huge boxes. So we often raid places for big boxes. But that's a priority to me. I love building forts now. That has become a priority in my life because my kids are very important to me. Margin helps to develop reserves when you start making those changes in your life and you start trying to figure out how to get the space in your life. Margin helps us to choose what capacity works for us. Balance helps to maintain the equilibrium and steadiness at our chosen capacity level. Margin helps us to keep our balance. Balance helps us to preserve that margin. You can get margin, but if you don't work to keep it, it doesn't matter. When you finally get margin in your life, like when you give up those things that are toxic or time drainers, and for some of you, it might be social media. I used to have students do a time study in class where they had to write down everything they did. This was in adult development. And I had students that were spending 20 to 25 hours a week on social media. That's a part-time job. And there's apps where you can track how much time you spend on social media. If you're trying to figure out like, what can I do to create more time? My guess is for some of you, take a break. Take a break from social media and see how much time you all of a sudden have. Contentment, because it's margin, balance, and contentment. This is reconciling two perspectives, our view of things and God's view of things. 1 Timothy 6:6-7, but godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. When we look at learning contentment, how do we become content with the things we have? Because sometimes our problem is not that we don't have the right things in our life, it's that we don't appreciate them. We haven't learned how to invest in them deeply or invest in them well. So here's some different ways. Intentionality, experiences, being in the presence of God through patient submission to Christ, moderating our desires, adjusting our hearts, daily choices, learning patience. Delayed gratification is one of the best ways to appreciate things. Give yourself a goal and say, I'm not going to get this until I get all of these things done. You will appreciate those things and value them so much more. Which I will tell you, someday you will have a choice about buying your children a car or making them buy it themselves. Make them buy it themselves. As much as you feel like, I can give this to them. Yeah, you can, but don't. And there's lots of things in life where if you work hard for it, if you take the time to develop patience, your depth and appreciation of that thing is so much greater. So here's an example of this. I had the opportunity in college to lead a trip for Habitat for Humanity. And when I look at experiences that help me to mature and appreciate things, it wasn't just going on a trip, it was leading a trip. It was being responsible for other people. It was learning skills. I got to learn how to roof a house, how to put up siding, all these things where I just didn't have the capacity for those things before. And this is why one thing I love about Huntington is you get these opportunities. You get these opportunities to do J-term trips, May-term trips, spring break trips, which, yes, it costs money, but part of what you're getting is you're getting those spaces, that margin where you get to go, learn something new, meet new people, and have extraordinary experiences. So, when you look at what gets in your way sometimes, and I'll be wrapping up here pretty quick, try to figure out what's hindering you from enjoying what's around you. Is it media? Which I know every time I get on Facebook, I'm just angry afterwards. Like I'm just annoyed at the world because there's so much frustrating stuff out there. And yet there's very little I can do when I'm reading that on Facebook at the time. It takes a lot of energy. Is it judging, expectations, comparisons, inadequacies? Part of how you deal with that's good self-care. Create margin in your life. Find the things that you can change. And again, it's not necessarily being less busy. Sometimes it's adding new skills. It's exercising, it's working out, it's finding a way to have better financial margin. Create balance in your schedule and your home life so you don't lose your equilibrium. Plan more than a day ahead. Plan a couple weeks ahead. If you really want to change your life, plan fun times or you times in your schedule. Block out an hour and say, this hour's for me and nobody else. Practicing simplicity and finding contentment in the things you do so you can appreciate them in the here and now. Try to simplify your life. The more you have, there's a song my kids like, the more you have to take care of the things you have. It's from Jungle Jam and Friends, something we listen to as a family. And it's so true. The more things you have in life, the more complex your life is, the more maintenance you have to do and the more energy that takes. So, create margin in your life. Try to find a way to have balance in your life, and I've given you a lot of strategies for that. And then seek out contentment with the things you have. If you can work on those three things, which if you're wondering like, yeah, where do I find this information? Richard Swenson is the author of these books, Balance, Contentment, and Margin. They are great reads. Might even be a few copies in the bookstore of Margin right now, if my seniors didn't buy them all. And here's a couple other key things to kind of leave you with when you look to reduce stress. Expect the unexpected and say no. Some of you say yes to everything. You have no boundaries. You love to help people, but you're stretched thin. Say no. It's okay. You're not going to hurt people's feelings as much as you think you are. And sometimes it's very refreshing when people get a no rather than a maybe, I don't know, like just say no. If you don't want to do it, say no. You'll be amazed at how much that one thing will change your life. Turn off the media. Cut back on activities. Practice simplicity and contentment. Get less done, but do the right things. And I gave you the example before, create buffer zones. Don't do things back to back to back, but give yourself a few minutes where when you're walking to class, if you see somebody you want to talk to, you can stop and talk to them. You can see how their day is going. Study boundaries, and then choose your priorities. Okay, so thank you guys. I hope this has been a not stress-inducing talk, but maybe a stress-reducing talk. And I hope it's something that's created a good challenge for you to work on the rest of the semester. So have a good day.